Hello, music fans. It's Kevin once again with Storytellers Union, and we're finishing up. This is the final episode of my best albums of 2022. If you've not yet seen numbers 30 all the way up to number 11, as well as the honorable mentions, those episodes are all streaming here on the channel. Check those out first. We're going to jump right now into the top 10. This is the big time. That's a segue. Number 10 on the best albums of 2022, Big Time by Angel Olsen. Olsen arrived on the scene as a folk artist, so it's maybe not a huge surprise for people who think of folk music that now she is quote unquote country, but she was never folk, and this is not really country either. She continued to add instrumentation as her fame grew until she basically became an indie rock princess. In fact, her last album was done with a complete chamber orchestra, big, huge string section. But this time around, she does go to the country, pairs it back just a tad, but not country in like traditional acoustic based Southern country. Think more like cosmopolitan country with ambitious arrangements, string sections, the like. It is a musical change that really suits her. She has a warble of a voice that is very engrossing, and she pairs that up with some of the strongest subject matter she's ever written about. Unfortunately, Angel had a lot of turmoil in her life since her last record. She lost her mother and her father within months of each other. She also came out publicly during this time. So there's a lot of lyrical subject matter that deals with acceptance and loss and feeling untethered, and it really matches the melancholy of the music in these soaring, beautiful arrangements. This is the best version of Angel Olsen yet. I know she has been acclaimed for a while, but if she continues working in this style, we all will be very much the better for it. However, because she keeps changing and evolving, it wouldn't be surprising if her next turn is equally as accomplished, but just something else. Speaking of a band that doesn't stay still when it comes to genre, number 9, the Arctic Monkeys, The Car. So any of you Arctic Monkey fans out there who were hoping the band would return to guitar-centered rock and roll following 2018's atmospheric tranquility, Hotel and Casino, you may be a bit disappointed to find out that The Car has more in common, sonically at least, with that last album than any of the band's prior works. However, they have never made the same album twice, and they don't here. Those comparisons to Tranquility Base are really on the surface. There is no overarching sci-fi concept as there was with that last one. The melodies are more out front, and there actually is guitar. It's not prominent. It's not the post-punk of their first album, or even the stoner rock of their second album, or even the pop rock of 2013's Career High AM. So what do we have here? We have something that sonically is similar to their 2018 effort, Tranquility Base, but the guitar is weaved in ways that it's used sparingly, so that when it is used, it's extremely effective and is the focus. Again, the melodies are more out front here, so for fans who didn't so much care for the atmosphere without the choruses that Arctic Monkeys were known for, this is a nice mix of the two, and really does make it yet another new style that the band is working in. Alex Turner, the leader and singer, continues to use his voice to amazing effect. In fact, the drama heightens on the opening track. There Better Be a Mirror Ball. To me, one of the best moments in music from 2022 is in that song when the string section swells behind him and he delivers the line, "So do you want me to walk you to the car?" And as simple as that line sounds, the way that he sings it and what's happening musically behind him just makes it so rife with implications, as well as a very strong sense that there's there's more things ahead than what he is just saying and what he's implying. It makes for one of the most passionate romantic moments, honestly, on record in 2022. The whole album is worth your while. The Arctic Monkeys continue to evolve, and you might like a different flavor of them, more so than you like this flavor. But if you just dismiss the fact that they're not making music like their first album, you will miss out on one of 2022's best. That is my number 9 album, The Car. Moving on to number 8, we have Kevin Morby. This is a photograph. I had the privilege recently to travel and was in Memphis and visited the world famous Peabody Hotel. And that is where Kevin Morby himself had camped out in order to basically craft this album. A lot of the demos and a lot of the songwriting and everything came while he was holed up there, taking his inspirations and turning it into art. The inspiration this time around came, actually, the title's a bit on the nose. He had witnessed his father suffer a very serious health event, and right in front of him collapsed. And the scare sent Morby looking through family photos, as one tends to do during these kind of moments. And he come across images of his father as a young, strapping, healthy man. And in the photograph, he is about the age that Kevin Morby is now. And so those things mixed in Kevin's mind, and especially on the opening title track, which is probably what I'll feature over on my personal Facebook page when I post a video from this album, because it is my favorite song. That is very much about the moment of knowing that you are at the age that your father was when you like to remember your father in your mind, and not necessarily the person or the state of life and time of life that he is in currently. That juxtaposition is powerful. There's a sense of nostalgia, but it's not all hopeless either. The rest of the album definitely deals with mortality and growing older and becoming our parents and all those good things, but it's not done in a way that is not musically pleasing. Morby sings in a style that's kind of reminiscent at times of the young Bob Dylan, and the band that's behind him is very sympathetic and warm. If it's a rocker, they meet the task there. If it calls for holding back a little bit and painting around the edges with some colors, they can restrain themselves in a way that suits the material. That's Kevin Morby's This Is a Photograph, something very much worth your time and attention. My number 8 album of the year. Number 7, The Mountain Goats, Bleed Out. Mountain Goat leader John Darnielle has long been one of indie rock's great storytellers. Oftentimes, he does take his inspiration, or even a challenge, as it were, to really dig deep on a singular topic. He often forms his albums around concepts. This is one of those types of Mountain Goats albums. The concept this time around is a little different, though, in that whereas a lot of folks got insular, looked internally, and during the pandemic, that isolation and things, John went the complete opposite direction, in that he looked outwardly and watched a lot of action films, a lot of escapist, which makes sense during the pandemic. I think a lot of people did that. But he then goes to decide to write about it and write music that is reminiscent of the movies he was watching. So what you have are lyrically, it's all bravado. It is all machismo. It is all action and revenge and bloodlust and no consequences. And just like the big, dumb, enjoyable popcorn flicks that he is taking his inspiration from, because it is all heavily testosterone-driven, driving type of music backs these lyrics of John's, and because of that, recalls some of the scream-along favorites of the Mountain Goats' early days that fans so loved before they started to venture out a little more and vary their material a bit more. But John is also one of rock's cleverest writers, so he knows that while he's laying bare the tropes of action films, that there is a meaning for escapism. There is a purpose of this type of escapism in our lives, but you can only run for so long from reality. So he definitely brings the album to a close on that note with the title track, where fate finally catches up to our action hero in a way I won't spoil, but it's really one of the first times the music changes from a high driven quick music to a ballad, and the mournful melody behind him really matches the fate of our hero by the end, when reality does catch up, as it does and will to us all. Um, Bonus here, if you're local, I'd be remiss to not call out the Mountain Goats are coming to Huntington. Yes, they're coming to Huntington next month. So if you're local, definitely check them out. Number 6, very different from number 7. When I say that number 7 and the Mountain Goats decided that pandemic-wise they were going to look outwardly with escapism, Andrew Bird looks inwardly, quite literally, with the album Inside Problems, his lockdown record, as it were. The sophistication that's on display here, if you're a fan of Andrew's work at all, you know how much the man is a savant. He's a musical genius, expert violin player, and builds great large arrangements, and that type of sophistication is very much reminiscent of his classic works. And to me, those classic works include things like Armchair Apocrypha, Noble Beast, the Mysterious Production of Eggs. If you think of that era of Andrew Bird, that is what is on display here in Inside Problems. So you're going to like it if you like those. The difference there is, instead of being so esoteric in the lyrical content and maybe even somewhat obscure, he's pretty straightforward in Inside Problems in a way that maybe is not very common for an Andrew Bird fan to hear him get somewhat personal with his lyrics. But as such, it makes Inside Problems both classic Andrew and something new for Andrew. There's a musical complexity that you're probably going to be used to. That virtuosity is definitely on display, but there's also a very warm and inviting side to this that might be even a little different for some Andrew Bird fans, and it's a welcome difference, and is my number 6 album of the year, Inside Problems. Moving now into the top 5, one of the best reviewed albums of the year, Always, Blue Rev. And yes, that's not a misspelling. That's how they spell always. If it's been a while since this Toronto band has put out a work, and it's the best of the 3 that they have put out. So it might be 6 years since their last album, or 5.5-ish, but it is one of the year's most gushed over records for a very good reason. It basically is the history of alternative rock music over the last 30 years. They have the strains of all their influences in the different songs, but never so obvious and out front that you can really recall it being any particular band that they are mimicking, because they're not. They've incorporated these influences in such a way that it plays like a classic alternative rock station in some sort of alternate universe where these were hits coming out of your radio. You have everything from shoegaze to power pop to indie pop to mope rock to even hints of punk in a few songs, just a smidge. But if there's one unifying factor, it is the beautiful voice that she displays, as well as the reverb that really soaks that voice, and the hazy guitars. It gives everything this, polishes it to holds it all together in a way where it feels of a piece. It feels very dreamy and gorgeous. And none of the songs last more than 3 minutes, 30 seconds. So it really is like some sort of alternate universe where these were hits, because that's how infectious these choruses are. And that's Blue Rev's Always at number 5. Number 4, we go from a young band to one of classic rock's biggest legends, and that is Elvis Costello. Now, just off the bat, A Boy Named If. You're going to hear a lot of folks, because this was well reviewed also, they will say return to form, and really that's code and a little dismissive. I almost went that route too, but the more I thought about it, when people say that, they really mean this sounds like one of Elvis's first 2 records, and that's when he came as a punkish new wave songwriter who took the rock world by storm on his albums. But gosh, if you just limited Elvis Costello to the years 1977 and 1978, just think about how much music we would have missed out on. Yes, it wasn't always everyone's cup of tea, but he had some classic minded work that he did with the Brodsky Quartet. He had sophisticated pop collaboration there with Burt Bacharach and Painted from Memory. There was the country music masterpiece, Almost Blue, the sophisticated pop of Imperial Bedroom, the New Orleans infused The River in Reverse. He did a collaboration with the Roots of all people that really is great. There's a Motown record in Get Happy that is absolutely a classic. Before alt country was even the word they used, that's really what King of America was. So I guess what I'm saying is I could go on, that there's hardly a genre of pop or rock or country even that Elvis Costello has not dabbled in, and therefore influenced over time. So popular music across the board would sound completely different if all he were allowed to make was that album in 1977 and that album in 1978, as classic as they are. But let's face it, My Aim is True, it casts a large shadow. So people are going to hear the rock energy, the heavy, the guitars, the quick pace of the vocal lines and go, oh, Elvis is back in fine form. And he is in fine form, but the man has never held to a form. So here's the trick. He's got the old sound of the angry young man that everyone loves from the early years of Elvis Costello. But within that mix, he keeps mixing in a lot of these other genre experiments that he has done over the length of his 40-ish year career. And so he kind of stealthily sneaks a lot of that in to that overall package so that folks are going to hear the Elvis Costello that they remember. But as always, he's never what you think that he is. He is completely Elvis Costello and nothing but. It's a beautiful record. A Boy Named If. Go get it. Go listen. Getting into the top three now. We go from someone that I've loved forever to a band that I did not know until this year. Not crazy about the name. It's a little too long for my taste, but Black Country New Road, Ants from Up There. If you go on Metacritic, if you read other reviews, I believe that this is probably, of all my albums that I have on my list, probably the best reviewed and with the highest overall score from critics of any album on my list. It was that loved, and for good reason. Because this is probably the most musical album on my list. It is absolutely overflowing with ideas. I did not have this band on my radar. They had one album before this, and I went back and listened to it in retrospect, and it is very good. But there is nothing in that work that would predict rather the majesty that is Ants from Up There. The interesting backstory behind this album is that mere days before it was released, the frontman, main writer, the singer, the voice of your band, co-founder Isaac Wood, announced he would be leaving the band. And so here he leaves the band merely days before they put out one of the year's most talked about albums. So it's a swan song. Even though the band's staying together, they're going to have different vocalists, they'll have different writers. It will not sound like this again, which is a shame because this is such ambitious music. The choruses come at you from odd angles. You don't know when they're coming. You might have 3 minutes of instrumental before it gets to the main part of the song. This moves like classical music in that there's different pieces and sections that are taped together, as it were. And oftentimes this means 10, 11, 12-minute songs, but they're never anything but engrossing and pull you in. I think vocally, Isaac sounds a bit like a cross between Win Butler from Arcade Fire and maybe Fred Schneider from the B-52s, which I know seems odd, but if you give it a listen, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. The music itself, even at times, reminds me of the young Arcade Fire, especially on the louder moments when it gets quite bombastic. But there's nothing about this album that I would not recommend as far as anyone looking for anything different and new out there. That when you think that good guitar rock is not being made by bands anymore, Black Country New Road is proving everyone wrong. Sadly, there will not be a victory lap, at least for this incarnation of the band, but don't miss out on Ants from Up There, my number 3 album of the year. We're taking it now to the top two. Honestly, at different points in time, any of these top three albums, I have switched out into the number one spot. That's how tight it was for me. That's how much I loved the Black Country New Road album. But it settles at number three, so I could have it number two. Spoon, Lucifer on the Sofa. Let me say this, and I'll repeat it just so that I'm clear. Spoon are the best band of the last 20 years. I know that leaves out a lot of my own personal favorites, but Spoon is the best, most consistent band of the last 20 years. There's no band currently making music at this level that has been doing it for this long without making a dud. Not even an average album. They have one of the most consistent catalogs in rock and roll. And in some ways, it's amazing when you think that they've been at it for 20 years and continue to do career best work. I don't know if I'd maybe say Lucifer on the Sofa is the best ever Spoon album, but boy, it's up there. And that's amazing this far into a career. And how do they do it without repeating themselves, but always sounding like Spoon is also a nice little trick that they are able to pull. This time around, they took their inspiration from classic rock. They wanted to strip back a little bit of the production, self-produce. I believe it's self-produced, but anyway, they stripped back a lot of the layers of the last couple albums that got a little expansive production-wise. And they mentioned in interviews like bands like ZZ Top, which is going to sound strange when you listen because, the Texas blues rock kings, ZZ Top, you don't overtly hear that influence. And really, I think that inspiration is less in the sound as much as it is in the approach. These songs do not waste any time. It's lean, it's mean. The guitars stab, the melodies hit right off the bat. A couple of songs start right into the choruses. There's not a wasted moment, a wasted breath, a wasted space. These songs don't track usually more than 4 minutes, and the whole thing comes in at a tight 38, I believe. Not a wasted note. And so this is one of the, whether you like the riff rock version of Spoon that can be incredibly catchy, well, you have that. There's the hardest cut. If you like their quiet, ballady side, and that they've really only explored on their last couple of albums, well, there you have one of their best ones in the song Wild. So really, there's not a beat that they miss in this. Spoon, Lucifer on the Sofa, a band that never rests on its laurels and continues to push forward this many years later. The same can be said for my number one. And if we can get a drum roll out there virtually, can I hear you give me a thank you for the drum roll? Another band that has been at it for a long time and have come out with an album that is one of their best in a very long time. Wilco, Cruel Country. Anyone who's watching this that knows us, knows Storytellers Union, Wilco is one of our influences. But this album has the most personality of any Wilco record since Sky Blue Sky, and that's like 2006. And I'll explain a little bit more on that in a minute. But first, when I heard that Wilco was going back to country music, I scratched my head because it seemed like an odd move for a band that spent the first couple of years of its existence bristling at the term country music, that they were not a country band. And even when they started, the word alt country started to be thrown around, which at that point in time, it really wasn't hardly a thing. It almost was getting coined by bands of that era, for bands of that era, and they did not like that either. And in some ways that pushed them to go beyond the confines of that country-ish sound and into pop and Brian Wilson harmonies and experimental. They were called the American Radiohead for a while. Like every album after that first album had its own distinct world that it lived in. And that could probably be said for the first 5 albums. Not to say they haven't had good work after that, because it's hard for a band not to somewhat repeat itself after a certain amount of time. And they continue to make good to great records and good to great songs for all these intervening years. But they've never had an album that has held together with such a distinct only in its own world personality, as Cruel Country exhibits since those first 5 albums, which is why it took me a bit by surprise, because I didn't necessarily expect that I would love a Wilco album again like I loved those 5, and yet here I am with Cruel Country. If there's any complaints anyone can make about it, it's that it's a double album, and maybe there are a few songs that could have been trimmed so it wasn't over an hour and wasn't 21 songs. Those are folks with short attention spans. Yes, that probably is true. It could have been pared down to be something even stronger, but there's no bad songs on this. So what are you going to get rid of? In fact, the sprawl is part of the charm. It is the sprawl, in fact, that reminds me, if there's any equivalent in their catalog, it's the 1996 sophomore effort of the band, and that is Being There. That album saw them trying to move away from what was being called country. They were never country, but those country-ish trappings, they were sort of bursting at the seams with these other musical ideas that was fighting some of those country-ish instincts, and that is on display here too. And again, in the length of the album and in the sprawl. Now, I'm not saying that this has the same energy as Being There, because that was made by a bunch of young men who exhibited that youthful energy. What you get here that you didn't have in 1996 is the wisdom of a band that's been doing this for almost 30 years now, and that is on display in the lyrics, whether it is Jeff reflecting on what it means to be a patriot in this time of divisiveness and conflict, and perhaps even sometimes being, in an imperfect country that you still think is deserving of the type of forgiveness and love that you give to it. That's a very adult thing to consider. There's also, the alienation that he exhibits in some of the songs in this age of social isolation, this search for connection and meaning. And it really all pulls together because of the fact that they've stripped down. It really, these taking away and playing mainly acoustic instruments doesn't make this country. It makes it immediate, and it really makes it warm. The harmonies shine, and there's no studio trickery, which they're extremely good at and have used for years. But by looking within and paring down, it really has broadened the scopes of these songs into making them even grander than what they maybe even would have been otherwise. And that's why all 21 songs are essential, why it is a classic double album in an age when people's attention span is can't even make it through a single song. Just give it to me in a 30-second blip on TikTok or something. So they're fighting against all of that notion, and it's something that you should believe in. It is, I will say, the best Wilco record since 2004's A Ghost Is Born, and that is high praise. It is also my 2022 album of the year, Wilco Cruel Country. If you get one record and listen to it this year, pick that one. And for that, folks, I really do appreciate you following. If you're watching this because you're interested in music and what the best albums were from this past year, and you don't follow us, definitely we would appreciate any likes, subscriptions, or follows you give us. We are a do-it-yourself indie rock band ourselves, influenced by many of the albums I'm talking about here. We're lovers of music, and we love making music, and we are hopeful that our third album, Leave Your Darlings, is out in 2023. We've thought that for a few years now, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But we would appreciate any support you gave us. I do appreciate you tuning in and sharing in my love of this music. Any of these albums I think are worth your time and attention. Drop in the comments anything that I've missed, any albums that you particularly loved that I need to go hear. Every year when I do this, I always have someone recommend something that I had escaped me, and I love it when you do that, and would appreciate you doing that for us on this as well. Stay tuned to our channel's fans. We appreciate you very much. I'll talk to you soon.